Welcome back, you guys. Today I'm sharing how to make this sprinkle fault line cake. This cake is made with 5 delicious layers of funfetti cake, which is my very favorite flavor. It's a total weakness of mine, and I'm cutting out the centers from 3 of these layers. So this circle cutter is about 3.5 inches across, and it was just part of an assorted pack of circle cutters that I have. So now that my centers are removed, it is time to assemble this cake. So I'm beginning with a dab of frosting on my cake board just to keep my cake layers in place as I assemble. And I'm going to add a layer of chocolate buttercream here between each layer. So this frosting is black frosting, but it's made with black cocoa. This really helps when you're making dark frosting like this because that way it's naturally colored a deep shade, so you don't have to use a ton of black gel food coloring. So even though it looks super dark, when you eat it, your mouth will not turn black, I pinky promise. It works like a charm every time. It also is just delicious because it uses black cocoa, which almost tastes kind of like Oreos, and it also has some melted dark chocolate in it. It's really just such a delicious frosting. So I'm adding an even layer of this on top of each cake layer, and I'm adding the 3 layers that are cut out into the middle of my cake. This is going to help create kind of a crevice for us to pour all those sprinkles into. So I couldn't resist using my sprinkle spoon from Happy Crafts to add some of the sprinkles in, but I ended up getting too impatient and just tried to pour them straight in, but that clearly wasn't a good method either. So as you do this, be careful just to get all your sprinkles into that opening, and then top your cake with your uncut cake layer. Now that all of our cake layers are assembled, it's time to add our crumb coat. And just as a reminder, our crumb coat is a thin coat of frosting that covers the entire cake, and it helps trap in any crumbs so that way when you add your second layer of frosting, it's super smooth and perfect. So the goal here is just to make sure that the entire cake is covered and that none of your cake layers are peeking through. So I smoothed my crumb coat using my bench scraper, and then it was time for the fault line. So I chilled the cake in the freezer for about 5 minutes until my crumb coat was firm to the touch, and then I began to add on this kind of funky line of frosting. So I piped a zigzag all around the cake and then used my small offset to smooth it out because you don't want this to be sticking too far off the cake. And the reason you want this to be relatively flat is because you're going to be pressing sprinkles into it. So the more uniform and smooth it is, the easier time you're going to have adding your sprinkles. So as you can see, because this frosting is fresh, the sprinkles are sticking to it and not sticking very much to our crumb coat. So I patted those into place just to get any loose sprinkles off, and then I piped an extremely thick layer of frosting around that. So I first spun around the outline of kind of where I wanted my fault line to be, then I filled in and began to smooth with my small offset. So as I was doing this, I'm just trying to get the frosting to be kind of an even thickness and to be sticking out in equal amounts. That way, when I go to use my bench scraper, it won't be too challenging to smooth. One word of advice on this is that as you smooth your frosting, it's going to kind of push in. So when you make that initial outline of your fault line, make it bigger than you actually want it to be because as you smooth the frosting, it's going to get pushed in and it's going to shrink. So I suppose for this fault line cake, it is a converging fault line. All jokes aside though, as I'm doing this, I first focused on smoothing that bottom half, and then I took my bench scraper up and focused on the top half. I found that doing this way really helped me focus on each individual ridge of the fault line, and it made it a lot easier to get a smooth finished look. I loved the ledge on top of the cake, so I left that texture there, and then I chilled the cake for about 5 minutes in the freezer before I began painting on a gold border. So as I was doing this, at first I was going to focus on painting just the inside of the fault line, but as I began to kind of make some of my brush strokes a bit bigger, I really loved that texture. So I started going back over what I had done and creating some brush strokes to make it look like, kind of like the gold was shooting out of the fault line. I just really loved it because it made me feel like the sprinkles were just ready to explode out of the cake, and I feel like it gave the cake a lot of movement, which I really liked. I just loved that feathered look, so I went back and made some of my brush strokes even more dramatic, and then added some gold to the top of the cake as well. So this cake turned out way different than I'd initially planned, but that's one of my favorite things about cake decorating is just getting started and seeing where the process takes you. So that's the finishing touch, and now our fault line cake is complete. I cannot get over the contrast between those colorful sprinkles and that black frosting. So just as a reminder, today's cake is actually inspired by the sprinkle letters from Happy Crafts, which I am just obsessed with. So now it's time to cut into our cake and see all those sprinkles flow out of it. Now it's time for my favorite part, the taste test, and let me just tell you, it passed. I ate like half of that massive slice, sprinkles and all. So if you guys want to recreate this cake, the recipe is up on chelsweets.com, and I hope you guys had fun watching. If you have any ideas for future cakes, let me know in the comments section.